The importance of the three bodies and worlds. Hello, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with a video about the importance of the three worlds or bodies. The gross or physical body and world. The second is the subtle or vital body and world. And the third one is the causal or mental body and world. There were lots of questions recently about these three bodies and worlds, and also misunderstandings and comments I read and videos of colleagues. So here another video to make this clear. Don't forget to like and subscribe. First of all, why do I say bodies and worlds, or worlds and bodies? Well, the whole world consists from a Vedic point of view of three worlds, not one. The same goes for the bodies of individual entities such as human beings and animals and plants and so on. There are three bodies. Usually we only see one, the gross or physical body. So whenever I say gross, I mean physical. And when I say physical, I mean gross also. These are different translations, mean the same. There's not much I have to say about the gross world and body. That's the one that you experience easily every day, because that's how we have been taught. You've been taught that this body that here can slap here, that's your body, and all the stuff around you, you can see your desk and the window and so on, the computer, that is part of the physical world, just like when you look outside, the ground and the air and the trees and the sky and the ocean, all physical. And they are subject to physical and chemical and mathematical laws. And most of all, they are or appear to be logical and dual. Like, for example, there's a positive and a negative. It's really all based on mathematics. Everything can be explained in mathematical terms. And if we can't, then we assume that we just haven't understood it yet, but we will in future. In a very materialistic worldview, there's only this gross physical world with our physical bodies in it. Nothing else exists. In many spiritual, religious or shamanistic worldviews, it's the other way around. There's this other world, this other reality, this more subtle, invisible reality, which governs what we perceive as physical reality. Physical reality is just a manifestation of this other invisible ideal world. But this whole war, which one is true, the materialistic worldview or the idealistic worldview, is completely nonsensical, because both are true. Within the physical world, which is also one world that does exist, insofar as anything does exist, it is true. In the subtle world, something else is true. And in the causal world, something else is true. These are parallel identities, parallel worlds, parallel realities. They do not contradict each other, and they are not based upon each other. They are almost independent of each other. They also don't look like an onion model. It's not an onion model. We try to imagine things in the usual 2 or 3 dimensions we were taught to think in and imagine in. This is not limited to 2 or 3 dimensions. So what is the subtle or vital world and the subtle or vital body about? Sri Aurobindo called it vital because it is about life energy. about life, the force of life. This is something you cannot explain with physics and chemistry. You cannot measure life force, but you know if something is alive or not. A dead person does not look and feel the same as an alive person. The tricky thing to understand here is not this, but that everything is alive. Not only animals and plants and human beings who are just animals as well, but also stones and water and air. It's all pervaded by a life force that has been called chi or prana, for example. That is also why it's so important to practice hatha yoga or qigong or pranayama. These are the easiest methods to get to know your own vital body. And here's the next misunderstanding. You already do have a vital body and a causal body. You do not have to create it. You just have to get into contact with it again. You have to learn about it, just as you have learned how to walk and ride a bicycle and drive a car and write and speak one or several languages. You can, and I recommend you to do it, learn how to use your vital body. Anyway, it functions, it works without you conscious doing, but it's better if you have some kind of influence. Otherwise, it will just function on minimum autopilot, like your emotions, for example. Why are emotions so overwhelming? Because you have no influence, no conscious influence over your vital body. Emotions are also part of the vital body. Same goes for your breathing and heartbeat and digestion. It's a very good thing, though, that you don't have to control this. It just works by itself. But some people can learn how to influence this. Eat different stuff or live on contaminated food or very little food, breathe less, don't feel cold, and so on. And the subtle or vital world, what is this? This is also the world of invisible energies which influence things. The so-called astral world is not a world by itself, it's part of the vital world, which can be distinguished or further divided into 4 planes. And in all these different 4 worlds or planes, different things are possible, and you can learn things there. And there are other beings which I recommend you not to get into contact with. Just read a Carlos Castaneda book and you know what the subtle or vital world is all about. In the vital world, you can also heal diseases. Yeah? A surgery, for example, and biochemical drugs, they work within the gross sphere mostly. And all other kinds of medicine and healing, like homeopathy and shamanism, work in the vital sphere. And then there are others like osteopathy and acupuncture, for example, which work in the gross and the vital sphere. One very famous aspect of the vital or subtle world and body is the so-called siddhis, supernatural abilities. What are supernatural abilities? Anything that is completely normal for you, something you can do that others can't, is a siddhi. If you can do something that more than 99% of all other people you know cannot do, then you have a siddhi. And once you get into the vital sphere and body, once you get to know them well, you will get more and more siddhis. They're just gifts. You will suddenly realize, I can do this. And from the viewpoint of the gross sphere, they seem to be like magic, but they're not. It's just they work differently because they're subject to different laws, because they're from the vital sphere. And those cities are huge distractions. My advice is, whenever you realize that you have a city, so what? They're not often very useful. They're huge distractions and a huge danger to identify with them and falling into the next ego trap of the ego coming back. Because the prerequisite to enter the subtle world, to get to know the subtle world in your own subtle body, is to realize that the self you have identified with before is not. So the no self experience is usually a prerequisite to get into contact with the subtle and the mental world. To get into contact with the subtle world is not enlightenment. It's often assumed that it is. But we don't have only two realities, we have at least three. Enlightenment is to get into contact with the mental or causal world and body. And psychedelic entheogenic substances like LSD and DMT and so on, ayahuasca and so on, they have a influence on your subtle body, and they will grant you glimpses into the subtle world. But they're only glimpses. They only last as long as the experience lasts, which is induced by the entheogen, and also they are kind of superficial. So they're not long-lasting and they're superficial, and they give you again the illusion, the dangerous, destructive illusion that you've gotten somewhere, that you're enlightened or something. You're not. You can see this very well with people like Timothy Leary and many other internet gurus who advocate DMT and so on. They're not enlightened, but they think they are. And lastly, there's the mental causal world. We'll make a separate video about this later, because this is a little bit more complicated. It is beyond all logical understanding. Nothing in the mental world can be understood by logic, because logic is dual, and this is far beyond the dual. It's even beyond the non-dual. In spiral dynamics terms, it's third tier. In Hawkins scale terms, it's beyond 700. In Jeffrey Martin's locations terms, is beyond location 12. Very, very few people have continuous access to the causal world. For example, Jed McKenna and Mother Mira. In the causal world, you have access to things like karma, destiny, your script. You have access to things like space and time. Time stops to be linear there. That sounds cool, and many people say, oh yeah, I want to have this experience of no self and no time and no matter and so on, but who wants to have this experience? This person who thinks and says or writes now, I want to have this experience, will not exist anymore. In the subtle world, you can still have some type of ego or vestiges thereof. But in the mental world, no. You cannot go into the mental world or contact the mental world or your mental body while still feeling like a person. It's not possible. No one can go there. No one can go there. No person can go there. Only if your personality is dissolved, you can go there. But of course, this is a bit tricky. Yeah? If you're in a zone of no time, no space, no matter, no person, you also can get lost then. It's really terrifying in the beginning. as Gurdjieff has discovered, there are less laws. The more you go towards the source, there are less laws. The most laws you have in the gross world, and less laws in the subtle world. That's why you can do things that in the gross world are impossible. Then less laws in the causal world. That's why you can do things there that are impossible in the subtle and the gross world. Yeah, there are also some cities in the mental world. And there are less laws in what Sri Aurobindo calls the overmind, and less laws in what Sri Aurobindo calls the supramental, and less laws in Satchidananda, and so on. There are less laws because it goes towards a unity that we cannot understand logically. And one word of caution that I will speak about more in the video about the mental world and body is, once you're lost your contact with linear time, strange things can happen. For example, you can fall into some kind of sleep or stupor for several days. And this is quite normal. But others will get scared, and sometimes it's better if they try to wake you up, and sometimes not. But of course, it's not very good if they think you're dead. So you better inform people if you ever cross that 700 threshold into the mental world and feel the experience of no time or no linear time. Inform your friends and family that you might fall asleep for a few days. It is very difficult to maintain staying constantly in the mental world, of having a constant conscious contact to your mental body or causal body. It's very difficult because it impedes your day-to-day interaction. That is why some gurus withdraw and live in a cave or an ashram office like Sri Aurobindo, for example, because you need the setup. You need the setup to be able to stay there. Otherwise, it's too distracting. You cannot do a normal job and explore the causal world. And the last thing I want to say here, that all gurus who have assumed that the causal body will give you the power of healing all diseases and defeating death have died. And it's not a solution to the death problem. To the contrary, you might even die sooner. Yeah, this is to enter the causal world. The closer you come to what Hawkins calls 1000, the more stressful it is for your gross body, and the gross body can die of a heart attack or a stroke. The physical body cannot take a, let's call it, vibration of 1000, to stay with David Hawkins, or it will die. That is what Rilke, the famous poet Rilke, meant with his saying, all angels are terrible. He was not talking about beings with wings out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. He was talking about the mental realm and of the calibration between 700 and 1000. It's terrible at first, or terrifying, because all structures you're used to are gone. And it's not like watching a movie where you watch from the outside passively. You're in it. Many people who watched The Matrix, the first part, thought, wow, that's really cool. At the end of the movie, Neo suddenly can see everything in this weird greenish programming. All reality is suddenly transformed into floating code. For movie purposes, we see Neo in two realities. In the gross reality and then in the other reality where he sees the code. But when you're in the mental world, everything, you just see the code. Everything is translucent. There's no feeling of time, no feeling of you, no feeling of separation between you and the other thing. Yeah, everything is just code. Or another analogy, you can look at the sun, which is very bright. If you look at the sun for too long, without clouds or glasses, it can even damage your eyes. To enter the mental world is to be in the sun, or is to be the sun, or feel like the sun. The physical world feels totally superficial, one-dimensional, unreal. Sounds cool, but there's a danger of staying there, not returning, which in physical terms is dying, called dying. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you for joining me as a Patreon. Thank you to all my patrons, and see you soon.